The morning sun always hits our eastern pasture first, lighting up the dewdrops like thousands of tiny diamonds scattered across the land. My grandfather taught me to appreciate these moments when I was just tall enough to peer over the wooden fence. This ranch has been in our family for 3 generations. My great-grandfather purchased these 120 acres with cash saved through the Great Depression, and each generation since has protected it, nurtured it, and passed it down with pride. Our modest farmhouse sits at the center of the property, its white paint constantly fighting a battle against the elements. The barn, older than any building in the county, stands tall despite its weathered boards and creaking joints. Every nail, every fence post, every cleared field represents decades of family sweat and determination. The creek that runs through the western edge provides water for our cattle and creates a natural boundary that has defined our land since before I was born. My grandfather, now 76, still rises before dawn most days. His hands are maps of hard work, calloused, scarred, strong. He does not waste words or emotions, but his love for this land speaks through his actions. When he surveys the property from our front porch each evening, his eyes carry the weight of responsibility and the light of devotion. The peace we had known for decades began to change 3 years ago. The development company first cleared land just beyond our northern boundary. Within months, cookie-cutter homes sprouted where wild grasses once grew. The Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association formed quickly after, bringing with them rules about lawn height, mailbox designs, and exterior paint colors that seemed alien to our way of life. We minded our business and expected them to do the same. The property lines were clear, established decades before their fancy houses arrived. But then unfamiliar vehicles began appearing along our shared boundary. Men in polo shirts with clipboards would stand at the edge of their development, pointing toward our land, taking notes and photographs. "They are sizing us up," grandfather said one evening as we watched a black sedan slowly cruise along our fence line. "City folks bringing their rules out to the country never ends well for the country." I noticed his gaze lingering on the creek, our water source, our boundary, our birthright. Something in his expression told me he was already preparing for a fight he could sense coming. The vehicles appeared more frequently in the following weeks. Sometimes they parked just on their side of the property line, occupants staring across at our cattle or the old oak trees that had witnessed a century of seasons. "Should we say something to them?" I asked grandfather one evening as we watched a white SUV with "Community Security" printed on its door idling near our east gate. He shook his head slowly. "Not yet, but we will need to soon. That land has been in our family too long to let strangers start making decisions about it." The peaceful rhythm of ranch life continued on the surface, but underneath, like the current in our creek after heavy rain, something stronger was beginning to flow. We did not know then how personal this encroachment would become, or how far my grandfather would go to protect what was rightfully ours. The morning it all began started like any other. Spring had fully arrived, bringing with it the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass. I had just finished feeding the cattle when I spotted it, a white SUV with "Community Security" emblazoned on its side, parked brazenly under the large oak tree on our private access road. This was no longer just cruising along the border. This was trespassing, plain and simple. The vehicle sat approximately 50 yards onto our property, positioned perfectly to view the backyards of the HOA houses across the shared property line. Through the windshield, I could see the driver, a middle-aged man in an ill-fitting tan uniform, holding binoculars to his eyes, completely absorbed in surveilling the HOA residents from the vantage point of our elevated land. My heart rate quickened, but I maintained my composure. Grandfather had always taught me that how you approach conflict matters as much as the conflict itself. I walked steadily toward the vehicle, making sure my movements were visible and non-threatening. As I approached, the officer lowered his binoculars but made no move to start his engine or acknowledge his trespass. "Good morning," I called out, stopping a respectful distance from his driver's side window. "I noticed you are parked on our private property. This is not HOA land. Our boundary is marked by the fence line back there." The window hummed as it lowered. The man inside barely glanced at me, instead continuing to make notes on a clipboard. His nameplate read Officer Daniels, though I doubted he had any actual law enforcement credentials. "I am conducting official community security business," he stated flatly, still not making eye contact. "We have easement rights for security monitoring." "There are no easements on this property," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the incorrect claim. "This land has been in my family for 3 generations. I know every legal detail about it." Now he looked at me, his expression a mixture of condescension and annoyance. "Look, I do not have time to argue property law with you. The Sunny Meadows community needs to be protected, and this is the best vantage point. The HOA has jurisdiction over community safety concerns." "Your HOA has no jurisdiction on our ranch," I explained. "This is private property. There are plenty of locations within your development to monitor from." His radio crackled with static before a voice called out violation codes and addresses. Officer Daniels picked up the handset and responded with confirmation numbers, completely ignoring my presence as if I had suddenly become invisible. When he finished his call, I tried again. "Has this been your regular practice, parking on our land without permission?" A smirk crossed his face before he could suppress it. "Let us just say this spot gives the best view of potential violations." He gestured toward the houses. "From here I can see 6 backyards that have been problematic. It makes my job more efficient." The realization hit me. This was not the first time. This man had been regularly using our property as his personal surveillance platform. The tire tracks I had noticed last week suddenly made sense. "I am going to have to ask you to leave," I said firmly, "and not return. This is trespassing." Officer Daniels sighed dramatically, started his engine, and finally looked directly at me. "You ranch folks need to understand that progress is coming. Sunny Meadows is expanding, and there are going to be changes around here. My recommendation: start learning about compliance with local regulations." As he pulled away, his tires deliberately spinning in the soft soil, I noticed he had parked directly on a patch of wildflowers my grandfather had carefully transplanted from the creek bed last autumn. The delicate blooms were now crushed into the mud, their brief lives ended beneath rubber and arrogance. I stood watching until the white SUV disappeared down our private road, a sense of violation settling over me like an unwelcome shadow. This was more than a simple boundary dispute. This was someone claiming our land as if it were merely an extension of their authority, an authority we had never recognized or invited. That evening, our kitchen table became a war room of sorts. The polished oak surface, which had hosted countless family meals and celebrations, now disappeared beneath property deeds, boundary surveys, and county maps. The warm glow of the overhead lamp cast long shadows as my grandfather traced the established property lines with his weathered finger. "The boundaries have not changed since 1937, he stated, his voice steady but threaded with barely contained indignation. "My father paid cash for every acre, $3,000, money he saved for 15 years working double shifts at the mill." My mother nodded, her expression grim. The HOA has been pushing boundaries with everyone. The Johnsons down the road said they received a violation notice for their tractor being visible from the development. They do not even share a property line with the HOA. I spread out the 5 photographs I had taken over the past 3 weeks, each showing the same white SUV parked in various locations on our property. This is not random. This security officer, Daniels, has been systematically using our land. Today he claimed they have easement rights. Grandfather's eyes narrowed. There are no easements on this property. Never have been. Every inch of this land is ours, clear and free. I spent the rest of the evening researching property law on my laptop, printing relevant statutes about trespassing, easements, and property rights in our state. The law was clear. The HOA had no right to enter our property without permission, much less use it as a regular surveillance post. The next morning, I called the Sunny Meadows HOA management office. The conversation was an exercise in frustration. The receptionist transferred me to a property manager, who transferred me to a security supervisor, who transferred me to a community liaison. Each transfer resulted in the same circular conversation. "We will look into your concerns and get back to you," was the standard response, delivered with practiced professional detachment. No one took responsibility. No one offered immediate action. After 3 days without a callback, I tried again, and again the day after. By the end of the week, the receptionists recognized my voice and would place me on hold indefinitely until I eventually hung up. "We need documentation," Grandfather said after my 5th failed attempt at phone resolution. "Words disappear, paper remains." Together, we drafted a formal cease and desist letter. I carefully cited the relevant trespassing laws and included printed copies of the dated photographs showing the security vehicle on our property. We requested an immediate end to all unauthorized entry onto ranch land and acknowledgement of our clearly established property rights. While I worked on the letter, Grandfather drove to the hardware store. He returned with a dozen bright red, "No trespassing" signs, the largest he could find. I watched from the kitchen window as he hammered them into place along our shared boundary, each strike of the hammer seeming to channel his determination to protect what was ours. The certified letter was sent the following day, return receipt requested. A week later, the signed receipt arrived in our mailbox, proof that someone at the HOA had received our communication. But days passed with no response, no acknowledgement, and no change in behavior. The morning after receiving the return receipt, I spotted the white SUV parked in what appeared to be its favorite spot, under the oak tree. Officer Daniels was inside, binoculars raised, apparently undeterred by either our verbal warning or written notice. "They are not going to respect paper," Grandfather observed quietly from the porch, watching the distant vehicle. "Some people only understand action." The weight of his words settled over me as we continued to document each trespass, adding to our growing file of evidence. What had started as an annoyance was evolving into something more concerning, a deliberate disregard for our rights and boundaries. The formal channels were failing us, but we were not yet ready to abandon them entirely. Little did we know that the real test of our resolve was yet to come, and it would arrive during the worst possible time for our ranch operations. The hay harvest waits for no one, especially not when storm clouds gather on the horizon with the promise of days of rain. Every rancher knows this truth deep in their bones. The timing of cutting, drying, and baling is critical. A day too early or too late can mean the difference between quality feed for the winter and moldy, worthless bales. On that particular Tuesday morning, The weather report predicted a 3-day rainstorm arriving by late afternoon. I had risen before dawn, checking the moisture content of the standing hay and determining it was perfect for cutting. All we needed was about 6 hours with the tractor to get the eastern field cut before the rain arrived. The hay could then weather the storm in windrows and be baled once things dried out. I headed to the equipment shed, mentally planning the most efficient cutting pattern, and stopped dead in my tracks. The white SUV was parked directly in front of the shed doors, completely blocking access to our tractor. Through the windshield, I could see Officer Daniels calmly filling out forms, surrounded by at least 4 no trespassing signs that he had to have driven past to reach this spot. For a moment, I simply stood there, disbelief washing over me. This was no longer just an annoyance or a boundary dispute. This was actively interfering with our livelihood. In the distance, dark clouds were already visible on the western horizon. We had precious little time before the rain would arrive, ruining our narrow window for harvest. I approached the vehicle with purposeful strides, no longer concerned with appearing non-threatening. Officer Daniels noticed my approach and casually rolled down his window without looking up from his paperwork. "You need to move your vehicle immediately," I stated, not bothering with pleasantries. "You are trespassing again, and now you are blocking essential farm equipment that we need right now." "I will be finished with my reports shortly," he replied without looking up, his pen continuing to move across the form. "There have been multiple landscaping violations in the homes adjacent to your property. I need to document them properly." "Those are not my concern," I said, pointing to the sky. "Do you see those storm clouds? We have a few hours to harvest that hay field before the rain hits. Your vehicle is blocking our tractor." He glanced up briefly at the sky, then returned to his paperwork. "Agricultural schedules are not a security priority. I have 11 violation notices to complete before my shift ends." Thunder rumbled in the distance, as if nature itself was underlining the urgency of our situation. I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "This is private property. You have received both verbal warnings and a formal cease and desist letter. You are knowingly trespassing, and now you are directly impacting our farm operations. Please move your vehicle now." Officer Daniels finally set down his clipboard and turned to face me fully. Something in his expression had changed. A new confidence, almost anticipation, as if he had been waiting for this confrontation. "Actually," he said, reaching into his briefcase, "I have some documents you might find interesting." He pulled out a folder and removed several official-looking papers. "The Sunny Meadows HOA has submitted preliminary plans for an environmental corridor that would establish protected green space along the water feature that runs through this area." "Water feature," I repeated incredulously. "That water feature is our creek. It provides water for our livestock and has been part of this ranch since before your houses existed." He shrugged. "Terminology aside, the plans include establishing HOA management rights over the watershed and riparian areas to ensure proper environmental stewardship. The county is quite supportive of such green initiatives." My blood ran cold as the implication became clear. "You are talking about taking control of our water source. That creek is entirely on our property." "Well," he smiled thinly, "eminent domain can be invoked for community benefit projects. The board president is quite close with several county commissioners." He deliberately mispronounced eminent as imminent, revealing his ignorance of the very laws he was attempting to weaponize. "You have no right," I began, but he cut me off. "I am just doing my job," he said, returning the papers to his briefcase. If you continue to harass me while I am performing my duties, I will have no choice but to call the authorities. Now I have work to complete." He rolled up his window, effectively ending the conversation, and returned to his forms. The thunder rumbled closer, and I could feel precious harvest time slipping away with each passing minute. The security vehicle remained unmoved, its driver seemingly untroubled by either the impending storm or the havoc he was causing to our livelihood. I looked back toward the house and noticed my grandfather standing on the porch, watching the interaction. Even from a distance, I could see the rigid set of his shoulders and the stillness that had come over him, the dangerous quiet that, in my experience, always preceded decisive action. My grandfather had always been a man of precise movements. Nothing wasted, nothing for show. As a child, I had watched him repair fences, deliver calves, and navigate floodwaters with the same measured competence. What I saw now, as he descended the porch steps, was that same deliberate purpose, but directed toward a conclusion I could not yet fathom. Without acknowledging either Officer Daniels or myself, grandfather walked straight to the barn. I remained where I was, torn between continuing my futile argument with the security officer and following my grandfather. The decision was made for me when the giant wooden barn doors swung open, and the deep, familiar rumble of our old work truck's diesel engine broke the tense silence. The truck was a ranch fixture, a 1978 Ford F-350 that had hauled countless loads of hay, pulled tractors from mud, and transported generations of our family across the property. Its faded blue paint and dented fenders belied the power of the engine my grandfather maintained with religious devotion. Grandfather eased the truck out of the barn slowly, then stopped. He stepped out, leaving the engine idling, and walked to the rear of the vehicle. From the truck bed, he retrieved the heavy tow chain, 20 feet of thick metal links that had pulled stumps and freed stuck equipment throughout my lifetime. Officer Daniels, noticing the activity, briefly glanced up from his paperwork but returned to it dismissively, apparently unconcerned by the old man and his truck. This indifference would prove to be a significant miscalculation. Without a word or glance in my direction, grandfather dragged the heavy chain across the gravel toward the white SUV. His face showed no anger, no emotion at all, just the calm resolve of a man who had made a decision after careful consideration of all options. As the reality of what was about to happen dawned on me, I found myself frozen in place. This was not the reaction I had expected, yet something about the rightness of it kept me from intervening. My grandfather had listened to weeks of reports about trespassing, had witnessed the dismissal of our formal complaints, had observed the threat to our water rights, and now watched as our harvest was endangered. In his mind, judgment had been rendered. Officer Daniels finally noticed grandfather approaching with the chain. He looked up with irritation, then confusion, then the first flickers of alarm as my grandfather knelt beside the SUV and began methodically securing the chain to the frame underneath the vehicle. The security officer rolled down his window. "What do you think you are doing? Get away from my vehicle immediately." Grandfather did not respond or even acknowledge that he had heard. He simply continued his work, testing the connection to ensure it was secure. "Did you hear me? This is official HOA property. Remove that chain now or I will call the police." Daniel's voice rose an octave, the clipboard now forgotten on his lap. Still without speaking, grandfather finished securing the chain, stood up, and walked back to his truck, the remaining length of chain dragging behind him. He attached the other end to the truck's tow hitch, again checking to ensure it was properly secured. Only then did Officer Daniels seem to fully comprehend what was happening. He hurriedly started his engine and attempted to drive forward, but the chain had already been secured to his frame. The SUV's wheels spun futilely, unable to break free from the impending consequence. Grandfather returned to the cab of his truck, shifted into gear, and began to drive forward slowly. The chain pulled taut with a metallic groan. For a moment, nothing happened, just the sound of the diesel engine working against the resistance. Then, with a lurch, the security vehicle began to move, its tires cutting deep furrows into the soil as it was pulled against its will. Officer Daniels frantically honked his horn and yelled out his window, but my grandfather was implacable, driving at a steady pace toward the western pasture. I began to follow on foot, unable to look away from the surreal procession. The ancient truck leading, the chain stretched between, and the gleaming white SUV being dragged backward through our property. With horror and growing realization, I understood our destination. Grandfather was headed directly for the creek, the very water source the HOA had just revealed plans to seize control of through their misunderstood concept of eminent domain. The security officer must have realized this too, as his protests became more frantic. He attempted to steer or brake, but physics was not on his side. The powerful truck continued its steady pace, pulling the smaller vehicle across the open pasture, past startled cattle, through the western gate that grandfather had opened earlier that morning. When the truck approached the creek bank, grandfather finally stopped. The SUV halted as well, now just 15 feet from the water's edge. For a moment, silence descended, broken only by the idling engines and distant thunder. Officer Daniels, seeing his chance, threw open his door and scrambled out, red-faced and shouting, "You crazy old man! Do you have any idea what you have done? This is destruction of property, assault, kidnapping. I will have you arrested and this entire ranch seized." My grandfather observed him calmly from the truck's window, then shut off the engine and stepped out. Without acknowledging the stream of threats, he walked to the back of his truck, disconnected the chain from his vehicle, and returned to the driver's seat. The security officer, seemingly believing the incident was over, continued his tirade while pulling out his phone to call for reinforcements. He did not notice that grandfather had not removed the chain from the SUV's frame, nor did he realize that grandfather had only paused rather than stopped. The diesel engine roared back to life. Grandfather shifted into reverse, aimed his truck carefully, then accelerated directly toward the white SUV. The impact was not violent but precise, just enough force to push the already precariously positioned vehicle. The SUV's front wheels, no longer supported by solid ground, slipped over the creek bank. Momentum and gravity did the rest, pulling the front half of the vehicle into the flowing water with a tremendous splash. Officer Daniels watched in stunned disbelief as his vehicle tilted at a 45-degree angle, front wheels completely submerged in the creek that had watered our cattle for generations. The same creek that the HOA had just revealed plans to claim. Grandfather shifted back into drive, turned his truck around, and drove slowly back toward the barn, leaving behind the partially submerged vehicle and its speechless driver. As he passed me, I caught a glimpse of his expression. Not triumph, not anger, just the satisfied look of a job completed correctly. The storm clouds were now directly overhead, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, creating ripples in the creek around the front end of the security vehicle. Officer Daniels stood in the growing downpour, staring in disbelief at his predicament, his phone already pressed to his ear as he frantically called for help. The rain fell in sheets by the time the first vehicles arrived. The security SUV remained at its awkward angle, front wheels submerged in the creek, water now reaching the bottom of the driver's side door. Mud splattered the once pristine white paint, and the community security lettering on the side looked absurdly out of place in its new aquatic setting. Officer Daniels paced along the creek bank, his uniform soaked and mud-splattered, gesturing wildly while screaming into his phone. "I do not care if it is the sheriff or state police. Get someone out here now. This is criminal destruction of property. Assault. This lunatic dragged my vehicle into a creek." From our covered porch, grandfather and I watched the unfolding scene with the calm of people who had already anticipated the storm, both literal and figurative, and made peace with their decision to weather it. Within 30 minutes, vehicles began lining our ranch road. First came the county sheriff's patrol car, its lights cutting through the downpour. Sheriff Martinez had grown up in the area, had attended school with my mother, and knew our family well. Nevertheless, she maintained professional detachment as she exited her vehicle and surveyed the scene, rain dripping from the brim of her hat. Behind her came 3 luxury SUVs, which parked haphazardly along our fence line. From them emerged 5 people in business attire entirely unsuited for the weather and location. The HOA board, looking both furious and uncomfortably damp as they huddled under shared umbrellas. Word had apparently spread quickly, as several of our neighbors' pickup trucks soon joined the impromptu gathering. Families who had farmed and ranched alongside us for generations parked alongside curious residents from the Sunny Meadows development. The audience for the confrontation grew despite the worsening weather. Officer Daniels rushed to Sheriff Martinez, pointing dramatically toward the creek and then at my grandfather. "I want him arrested immediately. Look what he did to official community property. I was performing my duties when he assaulted me and destroyed my vehicle." Sheriff Martinez held up a hand to pause his tirade. "Slow down, Mr. Daniels. I need to hear all sides of this situation." She turned toward us. "Mr. Thompson, maybe you could explain what happened here." My grandfather nodded respectfully to the sheriff and stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, carried clearly despite the rain and gathering crowd. "This man has been trespassing on our property repeatedly for weeks. Today, he blocked access to our equipment during harvest time and revealed HOA plans to seize our water rights." "That is a complete mischaracterization," shouted a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, stepping forward from the HOA group. "I am Jeffrey Williams, president of the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association. Our security officer was conducting routine patrol activities when he was attacked by this vigilante." Sheriff Martinez raised her hand again. "Mr. Williams, I will get to you in a moment. Let me finish with Mr. Thompson first." She turned back to my grandfather. "You are saying this has been an ongoing issue." I stepped forward, holding a plastic folder I had grabbed from the house. "Sheriff, we have documented 5 separate instances of their security vehicle trespassing on our property over the past 3 weeks. We have photographs with dates and times. We issued verbal warnings directly to Officer Daniels. We sent a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board by certified mail, which they signed for but never responded to. And today, their officer blocked access to our equipment during critical harvest time before a storm." The HOA president scoffed. "Anyone can take photos and claim trespassing. Our community security has every right to patrol areas adjacent to our development." "Adjacent, yes. On private property, no," Sheriff Martinez corrected. She turned to Officer Daniels. "Do you have documentation authorizing your presence on the Thompson Ranch?" The security officer's confident demeanor faltered slightly. Well, the HOA has broad authority to ensure community safety, and we have plans for an environmental corridor." "That would be a no," Sheriff Martinez interrupted. Did you see any signs indicating this was private property? There are signs, but... Again, that sounds like a no to my question, the sheriff stated firmly. Did you receive verbal warnings to stay off this property? Officer Daniels looked toward the HOA board for support, but Sheriff Martinez stepped directly into his line of sight. I am asking you, not them. Did the Thompsons warn you to stay off their property? Yes, but I was performing official. And did you receive written notification to cease trespassing? The security officer's face flushed with frustration. The board handles all legal correspondence. I just follow their instructions. Sheriff Martinez turned to the HOA president. Mr. Williams, did your association receive a cease and desist letter regarding trespassing on the Thompson Ranch? The president straightened his tie despite the rain still falling around them. We received numerous communications from residents and neighbors. Our legal team reviews all of them in due time. That was not my question, Sheriff Martinez said, her patience visibly thinning. Did you receive a certified letter from the Thompsons about trespassing? Mr. Williams hesitated just long enough to confirm the answer before speaking. Yes, but we had not yet determined our response, and that does not justify criminal destruction of property. The crowd that had gathered was growing larger despite the rain. Neighbors from both the ranch community and the HOA development stood in small clusters, their conversation creating a low buzz of commentary. I could see the clear division forming, longtime residents standing closer to us, newer HOA residents gathering near their board members. Here is the situation as I see it, Sheriff Martinez announced, addressing everyone present. We have documented evidence of repeated trespassing despite verbal and written warnings. We have a security officer with no law enforcement authority acting beyond his jurisdiction. And we have an apparent attempt to interfere with agricultural operations during a weather emergency. The HOA president stepped forward aggressively. And we have criminal destruction of property. Look at that vehicle. This man deliberately pushed it into the creek. We demand his immediate arrest. Sheriff Martinez turned slowly to face him. Mr. Williams, are you aware that in this county, interference with agricultural operations during harvest or other time-sensitive activities can be classified as a Class B misdemeanor? That is irrelevant, Williams insisted. He destroyed a $15,000 vehicle. Actually, it is entirely relevant, the sheriff continued, as is your security officer's repeated trespassing after written notice, which can be classified as criminal trespassing in the second degree, as is your admitted plan to somehow claim control over a water source that has been deeded to this ranch for over 80 years. The gathered crowd had grown silent, sensing the shift in momentum. One of the HOA board members tugged urgently at William's sleeve, apparently trying to suggest a strategic retreat, but the president brushed him off. Sheriff, with all due respect, your personal relationship with the Thompson family is well known. Perhaps we need to escalate this to state authorities who might be more impartial. William's implication hung in the air like the dark clouds overhead. Sheriff Martinez stepped closer to the HOA president, her voice low but clearly audible. Mr. Williams, are you suggesting I am unable to perform my duties professionally? Because I would be happy to document that accusation in my official report, along with the multiple violations your association appears to be committing. The standoff continued as the rain finally began to ease, sunlight breaking through the clouds to cast long shadows across the peculiar gathering. The security vehicle remained partly submerged, a physical manifestation of the conflict that had been building for weeks. rural values against suburban encroachment, traditional rights against new authorities, established boundaries against expanding influence. As dusk approached, it became clear to everyone present that this confrontation represented something larger than a single vehicle in a creek. This was about respect, about boundaries, about two different ways of life finding a way to coexist, or failing to do so. 3 weeks passed before the full resolution of what locals now referred to as the Creek Incident became clear. Those weeks saw rapid changes in both our relationship with the Sunny Meadows HOA and within the HOA itself. The white security vehicle had been towed from the creek the day after the confrontation. The tow truck operator, a cousin of one of our neighboring ranchers, had taken particular care to drag it out in a way that maximized the mud coating every surface. The once pristine SUV now sat abandoned in the HOA maintenance lot, a visible reminder of overreach and its consequences. Sheriff Martinez had completed a thorough investigation, reviewing our documentation, interviewing witnesses from both the ranch community and the HOA development, and consulting with the county prosecutor. Her final report laid out a clear sequence of events that left little doubt about where the primary responsibility lay. On this particular evening, Grandfather and I sat on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The same view our family had enjoyed for generations looked especially precious now that we had fought to preserve it. Mr. Williams resigned as HOA president last night, I told Grandfather, reading from an email on my phone. The board voted unanimously to replace the entire security team and rewrite their operational guidelines. Grandfather nodded, the swing creaking gently beneath us. Pride comes before the fall, always has. The investigation had revealed more than just trespassing. Sheriff Martinez discovered that Williams had indeed been planning to file for eminent domain over our creek, using falsified environmental impact statements to claim the ranch was damaging the watershed. The security officer had been collecting photographs and documentation to support this fabricated claim, hence his regular trespassing to gather evidence. When this scheme came to light, many Sunny Meadows residents were appalled. Most had moved to the development precisely because they appreciated the rural character of the area, including the historic ranch that bordered their community. They had no desire to antagonize their neighbors or seize property that had been family-owned for generations. The new interim HOA board wants to meet next week, I continued, scrolling through the email. They are proposing a formal written agreement acknowledging our property boundaries and prohibiting any HOA personnel from entering ranch land without express permission. About time, Grandfather said, his eyes fixed on the distant creek that gleamed in the fading light. Paper matters when both sides respect what is written on it. The sheriff's investigation had concluded with no charges filed against Grandfather. While his actions were not recommended, in Sheriff Martinez's careful phrasing, the documented pattern of trespassing after multiple warnings, combined with the interference with agricultural